waste that a society makes is a pretty good indicator of that society's attitudes and their response to taking action on climate. A society that doesn't make waste is doing a pretty good job at making sure that we have a livable planet, whether it's now or for future generations. Unfortunately, waste production continues to rise, and we've seen increases in household consumption and development and online shopping, and this is all really worrying. Waste is a product of consumerism, and it infiltrates every aspect of modern life. Being able to break free from waste is inevitably going to require some big changes at every level. It's going to require us to change habits and the way that we live our lives, so our lifestyle, as well as our behaviour, our consumption, and how we live day to day. And if we don't do that, then we're going to be forced to make changes anyway. A destabilised climate is going to impose changes upon societies that they don't like. We understand that changing your habits and your lifestyle to try and reduce waste can seem overwhelming. That's completely understandable. Change can be overwhelming. And there are a few ways that people deal with those feelings of overwhelm. Some people just choose to ignore the problem. And I'm guessing those people aren't watching this video. So we're not going to focus on those who choose to put their heads in the sand and ignore that we have an existential crisis and ignore the fact that we can be empowered to do something about it. Other people try to do things incrementally over a long period of time, like a slow burn approach, making out little changes like a single-use coffee cup for a reusable cup, or catching the bus to work once a week. Small little changes over a long period of time. But in our experience, that doesn't reduce the feeling of overwhelm, especially if the person is looking at their life as a series of thousands and thousands of required changes. And so they might perceive it to be a long game, like decades, until they can live waste-free. And so it doesn't necessarily reduce the feeling of overwhelm. And it's also potentially confusing for children if you're just reducing waste in one little facet of your life, but not in other areas, because the kids might not understand when are we trying to avoid waste, and that confusion might just lead to kind of resentment about the whole process. And I think that is part of the reason that we haven't seen wide adoption of waste-free living in the broader population. It just gets put in the too hard basket. Of course, not everyone has access to the same zero waste or waste-free solutions or hacks. Everyone's circumstance is different. Not everyone has a bulk food store within travelling distance, and not everyone has the physical capability to use a metal straw, and not everyone can afford an electric car. Everyone's circumstance is different. Not everyone owns land that they can grow food on to feed themselves. And I think because of some of these sorts of solutions being put forward by zero waste advocates on social media, there might be a perception that you have to do those to live a waste-free life. But they're just options. There are many other ways to skin this cat and to reduce your household's waste or your individual waste. Focusing on a certain subset of solutions and then finding that you can't do them all and rejecting the whole idea of living waste-free is is really kind of sad, because there are other solutions you may have just not found them yet. So instead of this sort of single solution over a long period of time, like a hack a week kind of approach, we prefer a different approach, which is principles based, where we're asking the same question universally. And that question is, what is the least wasteful option here? You know, so if you've got a mindset that you're going to avoid or reduce waste wherever you can in your life, not just in this little area of your life over here, but all across the board, then we'll find that actually having that consistent attitude, it reduces confusion, especially amongst younger people, and it sort of has a really good positive reinforcing effect, where you actually start to train your brain to see waste and see ways to avoid it, and start to have a mindset of solving problems and finding solutions to the waste that you're facing. So let's talk about how this can work in practice. A lot of people, and our household included, when we first started, were producing lots of food packaging waste. So food was a really big, obvious area where we could try and reduce waste. And so the solution that worked for us was to go to the market and get fruit and veggies, and go to a bulk food store and get the dry goods. It also meant saying no to a bunch of things. So they were the solutions primarily that worked for us to avoid what the problem was before, which was going to the supermarket every week and just buying everything in packaging. You might live in an apartment and have no area to grow your own food. You might live in a city that doesn't have access to a bulk food store. So what other options can you think of? Do you have access to a community garden where you could share a plot or have a plot to grow some food? Could you start a local food co-op with a bunch of other households where you each chip in and buy food in bulk packaging that you can manage, where you manage the packaging, or in reusable containers to avoid food packaging altogether? The benefit of this mindset, of this principles-based approach, is that it quickly reduces the overwhelm that I was talking about earlier. Once you've dealt with your major waste issues, for us it was food, and I think for many people it will be food packaging, then you don't have to think about that every day, because you've already identified the solution for it. There will be other days where you'll come up against a new problem. It might be waste in your workplace, or doing that when you go on a holiday, you might realise that there's a bunch of new challenges that you have to face. But day to day, you won't be having to ask yourself that same question, what is the least wasteful option here? You won't have to ask that all the time. And so that overwhelm will reduce really, really quickly, and you can get on with your life because you know that you're doing or applying the best solutions that you can in your circumstances. Sometimes you'll face problems that you can't identify a solution for. That's going to be normal. We still need to have access to information and people who can help us to problem solve this. When we started, our first visit to a bulk food store, we were sort of thinking of the different foods that we bought normally at a supermarket and what we could switch in and switch out. We didn't know what we were going to do about tomato paste. And a friend of ours happened to be at the bulk food store and said, oh, they've got this sort of dried tomato paste that you can buy in bulk. And that was a great solution at the time. And it was the benefit of having someone there who could help us. A lot of areas around Australia, I know there are zero waste groups on Facebook, online communities, good karma networks, different sustainability groups, transition groups, permaculture groups that can provide good support networks for helping you problem solve if you have a waste problem yourself. But it's definitely, the solutions kind of are better when they work for you in your circumstances. You don't have to fit the mold of other zero wasters that you see online. But having that mindset of avoiding waste where possible, we've found to be really beneficial for our whole family. In future videos, we're going to go into a little bit more detail. There are other principles that I'd like to raise and talk through, and some practical solutions as well. Not every practical solution will apply to everyone watching, but hopefully you'll get something from it and think about how that translates to your life. So I look forward to being able to roll out a whole lot more interesting content. There's a lot to talk about in this space, and we have a lot to say and a lot to show. So stick around and subscribe if you can, and we'll see you soon.